Hi, this is Helen Thomas, and welcome back to the CDFM study group. This is going to be a wrap-up of Module 1. So I'm not going to be announcing what page I'm on. I'm just going to be talking through the information and kind of making sure that you're ready to take the exams. So I will begin from the start and then kind of just flip the pages through and then pinpoint the important information on that page so that you're able to focus on those areas when you do your study time. All right, so we learned in Module 1 that the precursor to the Constitution is the Articles of Confederation. So remember, it was Declaration of Independence, Articles of Confederation, Constitution ratified in 9 states, and then the Constitution took effect. So the purpose of the Constitution, part of it was to develop the 3 branches of government, which is listed as, you are correct, legislative, executive, and judicial branch. You want to learn them and memorize them in that order: legislative, executive, and judicial. The purpose of learning it in that order is because in reference to the Constitution, Article 1 governs legislative, Article 2 governs the executive branch, and Article 3 governs the judicial branch. So it's easier to remember. All right, so we talked about roles and responsibilities. So Article 1, which governs which branch? Yes, the legislative branch. And the legislative branch, what's another name for legislative branch? Congress. That's correct. So Congress, the function of Congress to raise taxes, declare war, borrow money, all of that is covered under Article 1 of the Constitution. It talks about the length of service for the House of Representatives. They serve 2-year terms. The senators, they're in there for 6-year term. It talks about 2/3 of the Senate can override the veto for the president. In Section 7, it talks about raising, so you have Section 7, 8, and 9. 7, raise revenue. 8, there you go, collect taxes. And 9 is the one that talks about no money shall be drawn out of the Treasury unless there is an appropriation law in effect. So all of those are the functions govern the legislative branch under Article 1 of the Constitution, also Congress. Now, Article 2 of the Constitution governs which branch? That is correct, the executive branch. And who falls under the executive branch? Who's the leader of that? That's the president, correct. So they may either see on the test the executive branch or you may see the president. That's the same branch of government. So some of the functions of the president: serve 4-year terms. He's also the commander-in-chief of your armed services. And the president can also pardon individuals who are in jail. So they can pardon those individuals. So you can read through all of that. So the executive branch executes the laws. Legislative, they come up with the laws. Executive branch executes the law. And so then what does the judicial branch do? They are responsible for interpreting the laws. So what part of the Constitution governs what the judicial branch, the courts, Supreme Courts, that are allowed to do? That is Article 3. So that's the purpose of learning them, Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, because it goes legislative, executive, and judicial branch. So legislative process. We talked about the forms of legislative business. So how do you get something to become law? It's got to start with some base document. So that is a bill. So you have the bill, you have joint resolutions, concurrent resolutions, and simple resolution. So the bill and the joint resolutions, the bill is a general proposal. If you want something to become law, you introduce it in a bill. And the legislative process proposal is also used in the joint resolution. So it originates either in the House or in the Senate. Both the bill and the joint resolution must go to the president for the president to sign. So the joint resolution may be a process that is used to make changes to the current Constitution. If they want to make changes, joint meaning both sides of Congress, you have the House of Representatives, you have the Senate, and they do a joint resolution. They present it to the president for the president to sign to make a change in the Constitution. So the other two types of legislative proposal is a concurrent, meaning the actions are happening at the same time in the House, in the Senate, or simple resolution, meaning it's only happening on the side of one House or on the Senate side. So those are the forms of the legislative proposals. Now, where do we get these proposals? Where do we get origins of these legislation? There are three places you can get those, or three individuals. Who are they? The president, from introduction from a member, or introduction from a committee. So it may be a committee that introduced the law that needs to be changed, or something that needs to be law. It may be just a member, or it may be the president himself. And most of the time, the president will introduce legislation proposal through the State of the Union address. So then how does this bill become a law? What is the process that is used for that bill to become a law? So we say that it's introduced by those three individuals, president, member, or committee. Then it's considered in that committee. So let's talk about it. Let's think about if you're writing an evaluation report. And when you write that evaluation report, you think you did an awesome job. You wrote it up real good. You checked it, you spell checked and everything. You thought it was good. Then you send it forward to the first group who needs to review it. They review it. And what do they typically do with that NCOER or that OER, or that evaluation or appraisal? Well, they typically will mark it up, because I haven't found one that always goes properly through the process or goes through without no problems. So most likely they're going to mark it up. So the same thing with a bill. So the bill goes to the particular committee that's going to get the public hearings, and meaning you go in and you justify, hey, this is why this needs to become law, or this law needs to be changed. Then the committee will take action. That means they're reviewing that bill and they've marked it up. Now, once their committee action is taken, between that, what do you do with your evaluation once they mark it up? You take it back, you clean it up, you make the corrections, you make the changes, and then you resubmit it for approval. So the same thing. So you introduce it to the committee. You have the committee hearings, the committee markup sessions, where they're going to mark up, and then you clean it up, and the committee takes action, which is when you present them with the clean bill. It is then voted on the House floor and the Senate floor. So that's part of that concurrent resolution we talked about. The same thing happens on both sides. And then once the House votes, the Senate votes, then they come together to determine if there are any differences in their solution. So what they will do is they will meet in a conference committee. So whenever the House and the Senate comes together, they meet in a conference committee. And what the purpose of the conference committee is to resolve the differences between their solution. Then, once the House and the Senate meet together in the conference committee, then they make a determination. They have to settle and resolve their differences because remember, they have to publish that bill in identical form. So now you have the two documents, one complete document with the same sign off on both sides because they both have to agree. And that is the document that then goes forward to the president for the president to either sign or send it back. So once the solution is made by the conference committee, then that bill is enrolled. That's the final step of that legislative process. The bill is enrolled, so it's logged in to know that, okay, this particular bill is getting ready to go to the president. Now, what does the president do, or what are the president's choices once he gets a bill on his desk? He has four choices: approval or veto. The first one is approves and signs. He sees it, reads it, likes it, signs it. No issues. The second one, does not sign but allows the bill to become law. Now, how is that possible? The president didn't sign it, but that bill can technically still become law. Here are the scenarios. In order for that to occur, Congress must be in session and the president would not have returned that bill within 10 days from receiving it. So we enroll the bill. It's signed in at the time that it goes to the president. From that date of enrollment, the president has 10 days to approve or send it back. If that 10 days elapse, if that 10 days is missed and Congress is in session, the president does not sign, but the bill still becomes law. The opposite occurs in a pocket veto. Think about a pocket. You put in your pocket, meaning I don't have to do nothing. It's going to veto anyway. Pocket veto means we enroll the bill, send it to the president. The president has 10 days. Well, guess what? Congress is adjourned. Congress is not in session. So a pocket veto is when Congress is not in session and the president does not sign the bill in them 10 days, it does not automatically become law. And the fourth choice he has is to veto. Veto meaning he disagrees, will not sign, and sends it back to the committee, send it back to the member or wherever that bill originated. But always remember, part of the Constitution says that if 2/3 of the Congress can agree on whatever the decision is, they can override that veto that the president submitted. All right, so now we're switching to the federal budget process. It's a little bit different from the way how the typical bill flows through Congress and the president. The difference is the budget originates from the president. The president submits a budget to Congress no later than when? No later than the first Monday in February. So president submits budget to Congress. Congress reviews, agrees what they need to change to update, what needs to happen. And then once Congress is satisfied with the budget, then it goes back to the president. All the president will have to do then is sign off because the final authority on the budget is Congress. Formulation just includes receiving guidance from OMB. What does OMB stand for? Office of Management and Budget. Remember, we start with the Congressional Budget Office, Office of Management and Budget, USD Comptroller, Undersecretary of Defense Comptroller. So that's the hierarchy. That's as much as you need to know. So you need to know where you are in the process. So if OMB is issuing guidance, the guidance is coming down to Department of Defense and the other agencies. So on an OMB circular A11, whenever you talk about the budget, just remember the guidance from Office of Management and Budget is OMB circular A11. So they go through each step of the budget formulation process. Again, President must submit the budget to Congress no later than the first Monday in February. Now, let's switch to congressional action. So once the OMB gives the budget to the president reviews, agrees to this is what we're going to send to Congress. Once it gets to Congress, congressional action. There are 3 phases of the congressional action. What are they? That is correct. Budget resolution, authorization process, and the appropriations process, the one that's near and dear to our heart. So in the budget resolution process, remember when we talked about concurrent? This is the concurrent resolution process, meaning both offices on the budget resolution process. Now, the key here with each of these phases, budget resolution, authorization process, and appropriation process, is to make sure that you know which office in Congress, meaning which House and which Senate is responsible for each of these phases. So the budget resolution process is done by the Congressional Budget Office, but it's the only thing if you look at the chart, the only thing the Congressional Budget Office does is they come up with how much did we spend last year? Kind of like what we do in the budget field. You got to come up with our baseline. What are our deficit? How much revenue did we take in? How much money did we pay out? The Congressional Budget Office is responsible for doing that for Congress. However, the actual House Budget Committee and Senate Budget Committee are the ones responsible for the budget resolution process. And if you look at those charts when we discussed it, same actions occurring on both sides. The House is reviewing that budget resolution, all the information that the CBO gathered as the ones I listed before, and then the Senate is doing the same thing. Concurrent budget resolution, like we talked about in the beginning. They both vote on what the budget restrictions, constraints, limitations need to be. Then they meet again in the middle. When House and the Senate meets together, what is that called? What type of committee is that? The conference committee, that's correct. And the purpose of a conference committee is to do what? There you go, to resolve differences. The key to know about the budget resolution, remember, budget resolution process is a concurrent budget resolution. So remember, when we talk about concurrent, I also stated that concurrent does not need to go to the president for the president to sign. If you think about it, the president is the one that submits the budget, so there's no need for him to go back to review it, because Congress is the one that makes the final decision on the federal budget. So it may either be called the president's budget or the federal budget. So be familiar with the different terms. So House and Senate Budget Committee. Now the authorization process. The House Armed Services Committee and the Senate Armed Services Committee is responsible for the authorization process. The process happens exactly the same. House does their reviews and vote. Senate does their review and vote. Then they come together in a conference committee. They resolve the differences. And then in the authorization process, in order for that to become a law, what needs to happen? It needs to go to the president for the president to sign. So then what is the purpose of the authorization process? That is correct. That is Congress authorizing the program. So out of the budget estimate that the president submitted, authorization process is Congress approving the programs. So even though funding may be mentioned in the authorization process, we do not get budget authority in the authorization process. You have to wait until the third phase. So again, that's the House Armed Services Committee and the Senate Armed Services Committee. And if you notice, this authorization process is the only one where the House and the Senate names do not directly relate to the authorization. You had the House and Senate Budget Committee, and you're going to see in the appropriation process, you have the House and Senate Appropriations Committee. So those should be easy to remember. Process exactly the same. Authorization process gives us what? What does it give to us? It gives us the budget authority. It gives us the appropriations. It gives us the money to spend. So does the appropriation process need to go to the president for the president to sign? Yes, it does. In order for it to become law, it needs to go to the president for the president to sign. So that is the third step of the congressional action. So how many different types of appropriation does Congress have to vote on? 12 different kinds in various categories. But which three is important to the Department of Defense? That's the defense-related, military construction, veterans affairs, and energy and water. Those are the three appropriations specific to the Department of Defense. So what is it called when Congress does not complete the budget by 1 October? What do we have to then do? What do they have to then do? They have to enact a continuing resolution. So what is a continuing resolution? It's a stopgap temporary appropriation. What all of this continuing resolution ties back into is when we went over Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution says we cannot get any money out of the Treasury until we have a new appropriations law. And since we operate on fiscal, we only get annual budget. So when that year is up, if a new budget is not in place, you must have a continuing resolution, that temporary gap. So you kind of extend, or you have something temporary until a final budget can be decided upon. So some rules with the continuing resolution: no new starts. You're limited to what you spend last year until the actual budget is approved. All right, so let's run through budget authority. And when it relates to purpose, time, and amount, that's part of our fiscal law. We're all required to know that. So each of the appropriation that we talked about, those 12 categories, Congress has specific purpose, specific time, and specific amounts that is authorized for us to use in the appropriation bill or the appropriation law once it becomes a law. All right, so once we have the appropriation law, that's our execution phase begins in the PPBE process. So two things happen when Congress appropriates the money, when that appropriation is becoming effect. You have actions by OMB, and you also have actions by the Treasury, because the Treasury needs to be notified that now we have new funding, you can spend money. So the Treasury issues what? A Treasury warrant or an appropriation warrant. That's just notification to the agencies to say we've received notification from Congress, we have an appropriation law, your account's been set up. So that's what the Treasury does. The second thing that happens is OMB begins the apportionment process. So Congress appropriates money, OMB apportions money. So OMB begins the apportionment process. So what's the timeline there? So once the appropriation law is in effect, the agencies have how many days to send their appropriation requests? Their requests are their apportionment request to OMB. They have 10 days. What is the form number that goes with the apportionment? That's the SF-132 is used for the apportionment request. So we're part of DOD. So the Department of Defense has 10 days to submit. So even though Congress may say X amount of dollars belongs to DOD, DOD still has to fill out the SF-132, send it to OMB, and request their appropriation amount, which is called an apportionment. So that is the second thing that happens. So again, appropriation law in effect, two things that happen. OMB begins the apportionment process. The Treasury issues the Treasury warrant or the appropriation warrant. That's the two names that's used for that. So we talked about the 10 days that Department of Defense has to request their apportionment. Well, OMB then have 30 days to respond and to send Department of Defense their funding. So we talked about deferrals and rescission. Deferral means the president wants to postpone a fund until later, or rescission, they want to request from Congress to cancel a fund. Remember, you can't just change or do whatever you want with the appropriations. You have to go back to Congress to request approval. So once OMB apportions the funding to DOD, then DOD issues allotments to the agencies, and that's the rest of us. And so we commit, obligate, and we disperse funds. Another word for disbursement used in the CDFM is outlay. Outlay is when the funding is removed from the Treasury. All it means is the bill is paid. So again, once Congress appropriates the money, that begins the execution phase. Now, during the execution phase, agencies are required to submit an SF-133 to OMB every quarter. And all the SF-133 is a budget execution. So it's kind of like we do spend plans. The agencies have to say, I requested X amount of dollars, I received this, I spent X amount, and this is the reason for the differences, whatever that difference is. So you learned about the SF-132, which is the apportionment document, and the SF-133 is the budget execution report that's submitted to OMB quarterly. Now, as we are committing, obligating, and spending these money, then here comes an external auditing agency that works directly for Congress to evaluate us and making sure that we are following the rules that Congress has placed on the appropriation. So what is the name of the external auditing agency or independent auditing agency that works directly for Congress? That is GAO, the Government Accountability Office. And who is the head of the GAO? That is correct, the Comptroller General. So the GAO is responsible for ensuring and reporting back to Congress to letting Congress know who's been violating the rules and the limitation placed on those appropriations. So let's look at the federal budget breakdown. We have, just like with our personal life, we have revenues, that's your money coming in, and then we have expenses that's going out. So let's look at the federal budget. Where does the federal government get its revenues? What are the primary areas? So beginning with the most significant one, that's income tax, Social Security, corporate, excise tax, and other. So those are the areas. Learn them in that order because, you know, even if you don't remember, well, income tax is 47%, Social Security 33%. Don't worry about the percentage so much as knowing that the primary means is income tax, Social Security, Medicare, that money they take out our checks every time you get paid. So that's the breakdown of our revenue, money coming in. So whenever you hear them say or politicians say we are going to have to increase the individual income tax. Well, if you look, about 50% of how the federal government makes money is through our individual income tax. Now let's talk about the bills we have to pay, our expenses. We have two types of expenses, just like we do in our personal life. We have those mandatory bills. Okay, if I want my car, I got to pay for it. I want lights, electricity, I got to pay for it. If I want water, I want food, I got to pay for it. The other part, so that's your direct mandatory bills. And the second one is called discretionary spending. So that's the money when you decide, okay, I think I'm going to go out to eat tomorrow. Or I think I'm going to go to the store and treat myself to a makeover. That's your discretionary spending. So it's the same breakdown, federal government. But look at this. The direct mandatory bill for the federal government makes up 66% of our expenses. That's what I'm talking. These are bills that we talk about in the budget field, must funds. 66% of the money that is spent on mandatory bills. Well, guess what? Only leaves 34% in the discretionary part to do whatever else needs to be done. And let's go a little bit further. Of that 34%, the Department of Defense gets 18% of that, which is about a little bit more, yeah. So of that 34%, they get 18, and everybody else gets 16% to divide amongst themselves. So you can kind of see whenever they're talking about budget cuts, Department of Defense is always the big target because of the discretionary money. We get more than 50% of that budget or of those. All right, so I think I'm going to stop there. And actually, all of that was simply module 1.1, which is the resource management environment. So this portion is meant to be like a rapid, quick. That's why I didn't give you any page numbers as I'm going through these processes, to make it a little bit easier. As you go through the single videos, then you will actually take your time, go page by page. But once you get to the wrap-up session, you should be able to spit out the information as we're going through it. So thank you, and I'll see you next time.